along the same line as the stealing votes question, and that is, why don't you just move to Somalia?
You know, Somalia has roads, unlike Colorado Springs.
Now, I say this jokingly, but this is actually a question that many conservatives will pose, essentially telling you, if you don't like the way we do things, just get out of the country. And while it's a funny thing to repeat, it's become a meme within our crowd. But how do you respond to that in a way where you don't raise your voice?
They're the ones that suck and should get out.
There you go.
But realistically, the notion of Somalia being the libertarian paradise is a complete farce. And I'll tell you why. Somalia is ruled by warlords. It is a series of dictatorships, all fighting amongst themselves, all killing people. That is not a libertarian paradise. In fact, it is the opposite. So it is quite a disingenuous statement to say Somalia, well, it doesn't have any rules. It does, and the rules are quite subjective when it comes to whether or not the local dictator of your choice wants to kill you or not. So, but it is important to tie these two together, the notion of wasting your votes and Somalia and anarchy and everything else. And I can simply put it that if we're important enough to steal votes, why aren't we important enough to be included in debates? So there's quite the contradiction, as it were, when it comes to a lot of the arguments against libertarianism. We are not for anarchy as being self-rule. We do recognize the necessity of at least a few rules for people to follow. The Constitution would be a good start. And from there, we want a government that fits within that document. It's quite straightforward. So the notion of Somalia is just ridiculous anymore. It's completely arbitrary in its argument. It's basically an indication that they've lost the argument.
So, actually, founder's prerogative.
Yes, sir.
All right, and then David, you can make your statement, and then Matt has a question. Just one thing I would actually add on to this, and those of you know me know I'm not an anarchist. There's research being done at George Mason by a professor named Pete Leeson, who is an anarchist, and showed actually that, so the OECD has a bunch of statistics that they measure the well-being of countries. So you've got literacy rates, infant mortality rates, education rates, and there's about 32 of those statistics. And he actually compared Somalia under government and Somalia without government. And there's 2 5-year periods that we have to research the data, and there was an improvement in all but 2 of the 32 statistics without government in Somalia. So I would bring that up to anyone who says, why don't you go live in Somalia, that limited government or something along those lines is not always worse off. It just depends on where the people are and the circumstances they're in. So anyway,
that's good.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I'll just to clarify, or follow up more with what Brian said, remember that anarchy, I think generally spoken, when we talk about it down here, we're not talking about the people throwing rocks through Starbucks at the IMF meetings. You know, those people confuse anarchy with socialism, which is like the opposite. I need to understand that. We're talking about market anarchy or anarcho-capitalism, where I'm sure, I know you guys have talked about that before, but just clarify that those are different things, even though they have the same word. Back to the Somalia thing, I found it interesting. I just kind of noticed that I was born in '66. So I wasn't old enough to remember this, but I remember reading some of the pro-war people during Vietnam would tell the hippies to love it or leave it. Now that the progressives are in charge of the federal government, and we say stuff like, well, Obamacare is a bad idea and forces people to do stuff they don't want to do and is unconstitutional, they say move to Somalia, which is the modern day equivalent of love it or leave it. So what's the similarity? If you're in control, you say love it or leave it. When you're not in control, it's awesome to fight the man. Well, we fight the man, period. Doesn't matter who's in control. We believe in individual freedom, individual rights, and not force. All right.
Matt.